You think we're in an inflation crisis now? You think we're in an economic crisis now with 9 to 10 million open jobs? You think things are bad now? Real wages going down, real returns in the stock market struggling, nominal returns, nominal wages going up. You think we're bad? This will finish us off. The CBO came out with a score this week. And the CBO score requested by the Republicans was, listen, with this Build Back Worse plan, when you strip out the gimmicks and you make sure that the timeline for these programs is extended, because the Democrats will likely extend them. What does this thing really cost? Well, New York Post. CBO finds a spending plan would add $3 trillion to the deficit once the gimmicks are stripped out. Now, so just to be clear, we're in a massive inflationary crisis right now. We're struggling. We're in a supply chain crisis. They're printing money to pay for government spending they can't afford through the taxpayer base. And Biden wants to go spend, what, $3 trillion more if these programs are extended? Listen to Jen Psaki when they got the score. You would think they'd throw this thing out and be like, this is a mess. We're not doing it. We don't have the money. Nope. Psaki's doubling down, calling the score, the CBO score, fake. Check this out.
Well, to quote of all people, Norm Ornstein at the American Enterprise Institute, who put this quite well, quote, "You can't assume programs will be extended just because Lindsey Graham wants to assure that. An estimate based on what's not in the bill is bogus and fundamentally dishonest." I mean, this is not a CBO score. This is a fake CBO score. It's not about the existing bill anybody is debating or voting on. This is about proposing the extension of programs that has not been agreed to without the commitment of the president, which he's made repeatedly publicly, that he would never support extending these programs if they weren't paid for, period.
Folks, do you understand how full of crap they are? The president is a liar. He's got a history of lying. He can say all he wants, they're not going to extend these programs. But the hard reality, in my opinion, again, based on hard evidence in the past, opinion for Tom Kircher, you dipwad. My opinion, based on facts of what happened in the past, is many of these programs at sunset frequently are extended. They're not just basing this on nothing. And if they are extended, which the Democrats will likely do because they love government spending, we will add $3 trillion to the debt. It's not a fake score. It's a real score based on a hypothetical that sadly, based on history, is likely to come true. Now, inflation. Look, Fortune magazine. Inflation's up 6.8%, the largest rate increase since 1982. Here's what that means. It means a whole lot, folks. We are in a bad situation right now with inflation. A bad situation made worse. I had Peter Schiff on my radio show last week, and he brought up a really interesting point you should all take to heart. In the 1980s, when we had to crush inflation in 1982, which is the only time in modern history we've had inflation rates similar to one we've had now, we had to raise interest rates dramatically. The reason we were able to do that is the Federal Reserve didn't own a fraction of the debt they own now. The Federal Reserve has essentially printed money and given it to the United States government to spend. What's the problem with that, folks? The problem is the Federal Reserve eventually is going to, it's basically borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. The money all has to be paid back. The Treasury is going to have to pay back the Fed. If interest rates go up to combat inflation like they did in the 80s, the Treasury is going to have to pay back more money on interest alone, and we can't afford it. So interest rates go up, we're going to have a massive recession. Interest rates stay low, we're going to have massive inflation. Either way right now, we lose. Here's even CBS being forced to state the obvious about the just crushing inflation crisis right now. CBS. Here, check this out.
An economy that suddenly feels vulnerable. The inflation rate is up almost 7% from this time last year, the highest annual increase in almost 40 years. Everything's up since last year. Home prices, groceries, gas, which leaves COVID America coming to terms with a different kind of sticker shock.
Now, keep in mind, all of this, again, this should put the Build Back Worse plan in its grave. Massive inflation. If the programs are extended, even if they're not, we're adding to the debt. but we're adding dramatically to the debt, which is going to cause us to print more money, which is going to cause inflation to get worse, knowing there's nothing we can do right now. We are staring at a financial apocalypse right in front of our faces. All of this is happening while we collect record tax revenue. Check this out, CNS News. $565 billion collected in just a couple months through November. That's a record. So for those of you suggesting we have a tax problem, we could just raise more. We're raising the most amount we have ever raised through taxes, and we are still in a ridiculous debt pool we can't get out of. Let me throw a moonshot out at you. I addressed this with Peter Schiff as well. You may say, Dan, this sounds apocalyptic. We're either going to deal with massive inflation, prices going up and wages going down, or we're going to have to hike inflation rates, go bankrupt, and cause the most massive recession since the Great Depression. Yeah. That's a bad news. The only moonshot is if we have an incredible technological breakthrough, whether it's AI, artificial intelligence, whether it's in energy. I always say, cold fusion, something that, would dramatically reduce energy costs. Asteroid-based minerals. Don't laugh. These things are not, they're not happening right now, but they very well could happen, these breakthroughs. We could have a massive jump in productivity and wealth, which would maybe stem the inflation crisis. I try to be an optimist. I don't like to give you all bad news. So there is a way out. It's just a small chance, though. The more practical way would be to get a lid on spending today and stop printing all this money, but they're not going to do it, folks. They're not going to do it.
You just heard the Dan Bongino Show.